Obviously I really love my children, um, but I don't know how to be that. Um, and I would like to be that. I would like to be more that. But like getting there, I don't know how.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. I'm Josh Levine, your host. Today, my guest is Kelly Ayadi. Kelly is a social sexual 516 512 trifix. And I want to set this conversation up from the point of view of the passion of the five, the word avarice. And avarice does not mean greed like it means in current vernacular. The passion of the five, avarice, points to something that we call the withholding of the self, the habitual, like the feeling of a deficiency of self, where if my self contacts the world, then I'll be depleted or destroyed or something like that. So this conversation brought up some new ways for me to understand avarice, in particular, the way that Kelly habitually doesn't realize that she's not entering other people's frames, that other people are coming into her frame, but she's not really entering other people's frames. That happens in her relationship with her partner and sometimes with her kids as well. And it's not just that she's not meeting them in their framing, but that the emotional distance that she would have to travel to do that feels unavailable to her. And also in the way that she can struggle to contact herself in the moments, like what is happening with her felt sense somatic experience right now, and the way that she's able to understand herself in retrospect conceptually by, for example, thinking of what's going on with her one fix or two fix, but the holistic right now experience of herself tends to be elusive for her. So on that note, I'm very grateful to Kelly for having this conversation with me and for opening and unpacking some of the territory that we got to. I was pretty surprised at how vulnerable this conversation got. I think this conversation really exposes some of the heart and the suffering of the five in a way that I was really moved by. And we explore a lot about what's going on in her relationship, she being a rejection type and her partner, a 9, being an attachment type, as well as her relationship with being a mother. I think this conversation is really good from the point of view of showing the unconscious way that fives hold a sense of their own independence and separateness. So there's a lot there. And again, thank you, Kelly, for having this conversation with me and trusting me with this. And without further ado, here she is. Would it be cool for you to do this in a kind of life story way? I've found that doing that is useful because there's lots of little cul-de-sacs we can kind of enter into.
Sure.
Yeah.
You want to know about little Kelly?
I do, yeah. Yeah.
One of the biggest things I've noticed looking back is I probably seemed a lot more like you would expect a 5 to be. In elementary school, my parents had parent-teacher conferences every year about how much I don't speak, don't engage, don't. And in modern times, they probably would have assessed me, but back then that wasn't really a thing. They just wondered if something was wrong at home. And my parents were like, she's perfectly normal. I don't know what you're talking about. Um, and what I've realized is I just really wasn't interested. Like, I didn't understand why we have to do life, like why we have to go to school. Why do I have to talk to these people about things I'm not interested in? I don't know them. I just had no interest in really what my part was there. Like, why am I in school? Why do I have to do these things? And it got better as, I got into middle school, junior high, high school, because there were a wider range of topics, things I could be interested in and was interested in. And that kind of like opened me up to, I guess, finding that, oh, this is what it is. Like, I can talk to anyone and I'm fairly comfortable in most cases, as long as it's something that I'm actually into. I just don't want to talk about stuff that's not worth talking about to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what were you into? What was little Kelly interested in?
I was interested in languages. From that's also came up last time that I don't know,
Right.
just
Yes.
yes, just in
Yes.
Kmart
Yes.
as a kid, I made my mom buy me this Portuguese learning book because and I've I studied French in high school and then I studied Arabic in university and I'm learning Spanish currently. Um,
Hmm.
I can't really speak any of them at this point. Well, I
Okay.
still like understand, but it's been so many years since I've used a lot of it. Um, but it helps me in my work. I actually, part of my work is actually with refugees and getting them services that they need. And so between all the languages, I can kind of understand them and
Hmm.
what they're saying and at least say enough that we can kind of muddle through.
Right.
Right.
Let's do this in a context setting kind of way. So your current line of work is, can you explain what it is that you do?
Um, well, I'm a program analyst for the Department of Human Services. And basically, whether it's healthcare or um, food stamps or other services, I basically try to make sure everybody gets those services in a timely manner. And
The
currently,
services being
position is kind of currently like taking all the messed up cases as well because our state just decided we were going to end the public health emergency without any longer transitional period and you know probably probably 60,000 people lost health care, lost benefits, and it has really a larger effect than what people realize. I actually know somebody who had been clean for 2 years who has borderline personality, that couldn't get their medications and they ended up relapsing. And there's real world consequences. And I guess this is kind of how my two fix kind of works for me is
Mhm.
I do want to be this helpful person, but it's not like hands on, like with people i- in direct contact. Again, that five is kind of staying back here and doing it in the background.
Because the nature of your work is you take calls with people,
I do
right?
interview people.
And
Yes.
you help them navigate the fine print of various
Right.
laws and benefit
Yeah.
programs to help them get what they.
It's kind of like being a caseworker and a little bit of an attorney because you have to know the legal aspects and the policy and the federal guidelines, and a little bit of an accountant because you also have to run the budgets and see if they financially qualify and make sure those
Hmm.
numbers are correct.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm taking a breath real quick and I'm thinking, so I want to put some anchor points down in our conversation. So we have this work thing that is in itself interesting from the point of view of five, the way that you approach your work, your expertise in your work, which is you mentioned has been recognized by like you're sort of the expert. You have almost like an encyclopedic memory for some of these fine print things.
Yes.
Um, and we also have your relationship, which is interesting from the point of view of attachment and rejection because your partner is a nine, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's also just something that's fascinating to me is the journey of you finding yourself in this line of work, which was a total
Oh,
left
yes.
turn and surprise for you, right? Yeah.
Yes. I started out in terrorism research when I
Right.
first
Yeah.
graduated, and that was actually kind of an in the basement. I'm just combing through media reports and federal databases, and I can't say too much about it because I have a
Hmm.
huge non-disclosure thing. But um, that was just a lot of combing through because sometimes, just because a bomb went off in a mailbox, it could have been personal. The person's wife cheated, and so he was actually getting revenge on that level instead of it actually being, like a terroristic act. Um, so that's kind of where I started. And I think it worked for me at that stage of my life because um, I think a big part of me is not being comfortable unless I really know what I'm doing. And once I know what I'm doing, I'm absolutely confident. There's no, like, I know I'm the best at what I do. Um, and
Hmm.
so, at that stage in my life, I wasn't really sure. I actually had been a professional student for a while. I actually have almost 5 degrees.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you just
yeah.
list them? What are they?
um, Anthropology,
Hmm.
I do have a sociology degree and a criminology degree.
Hmm.
But I'm like about a semester short of having anthropology, studies, and Arabic.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, and I kind of started out with anthropology. Um, and I
Hmm.
think this goes back kind of tying into little Kelly.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't understand why the world works. And I remember, asking my parents very young, like, why do we have a monetary system? Why do we have to live this way? Like, I didn't understand why we had to live under these rules and these structures. And
Just to get a sense,
I,
how old were you? Do you remember how old you were when you were asking those kinds of
um,
questions?
I asked about the money, I think, when I was about 5. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
and then when I was 8, I started asking about religion and why that was a thing and why we couldn't have different beliefs. Yeah,
That's
it's
amazing.
always been
Okay.
a question, and I think for me, it's like I still don't understand, like, how things work, like, why people do the things that they do, and it's still kind of an issue with my family, for that matter, but and this kind of goes into when I picked anthropology, my family was just like, "What is that? What are you even gonna do with that? What?" And I didn't really know. And then I ended up actually having children, being married, and I actually ended up homeschooling my kids for quite a few years, until my marriage ended, kind of in trauma. And I kind of went back to school mainly because I didn't know how to do life. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do, who I was, if I wanted to. I knew I wanted to understand people, but outside of that, I I didn't know how to do, I guess, the SP type things because I'm SP blind, I guess. And like going to school was kind of a way that my parents wouldn't be, or my brother wouldn't be, or other people. That's like something respectable to do. And so it was kind of me doing my own path without having to deal with the outside noise of
Yeah.
those relationships.
I'm tracking a couple things. So first of all, this you mentioned the people orientation of your two fix and also one wing
Uh-huh.
two, and also social sexual. So there's a lot of energy in your typing that is directed at other human beings, and
Yes.
also this core fiveness, which is sort of private. And I love this word.
Yes.
Another five I was talking to recently gave the word uncooperative, which I love.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yes.
yeah, certain just not buying into
Yeah. I actually
what's
ended
here.
up not really being close with my family. I mean, we weren't not close, but I just did my own thing. And to me, going back to school was kind of that. Like, they weren't going to be messing with me because they're like, well, she's finishing school, she's trying to get somewhere.
Oh yeah, was that like a big part of your conscious or unconscious motivation to do that?
Uh,
Just
I
not
didn't
being messed
realize it.
with.
I didn't realize it at the time, but
Uh
like as I was graduating, I was like, a lot of this has just been my way of not dealing with
hmm
those aspects. Like, I'm doing my thing. This is how I want to live my life.
hmm
Um, and it's still very much that dynamic within my family, especially.
Right.
I think like my children get me, my partner gets me, but like my family of origin still thinks like, Are you doing anything with your life?"
hmm hmm
Yeah. I don't think they didn't understand homeschooling my children. They didn't understand that I actually don't care about having all these things and
Hmm.
doing things a particular way. And yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I do think that they probably think I'm not very cooperative. And also
Sure.
there's the aspect where like I don't reach out. I am very private in that way of I'm not going to share my issues. I'm not going to go to my family and say, "Oh, I'm not where I need to be because I'm going through this and having these issues." Like I take care of all those things, or I think I
Hmm.
can anyway, by myself and always have. In some ways, and it's gotten pretty destructive at points in life.
Hmm. Yeah. An image is coming to me that I've thought of before with respect to five. It's almost like let's see how to put it. It's kind of like you're living life inside like a submarine with a periscope that is directed in towards
Yes.
things that your instinctual stacking is moving it towards. So like
Y-
I'm thinking about anthropology, I'm thinking about languages and these areas of fascination, and it's kind of you're you're in graduate school programs, you're in school, you're technically in the world. um,
Yes.
but in a
Yeah.
certain way, not really. You're
Yeah.
sort of
I've kind of
behind. Yeah.
I've I've kind of described it like either like being a drone operator or kind of
Oh,
like
that's
being in the
good. Yeah.
Matrix or something, but I think maybe the
Yeah.
drone
Yeah.
operator where it's like I'm navigating life through this, not me.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah, it's
So I'm thinking about where we are in this conversation, and I have some energy towards the I'm still fascinated by little Kelly and what little Kelly was interested in, and not buying into or just participating in what was sort of given
well,
at school.
yeah, I think also little Kelly was a little bit feral. Um,
That's an interesting word.
and
What do you
part
mean?
of it is some of that is generational. That latchkey kids, and my dad was self-employed and worked 70, 80, 100-hour weeks. Um, and my mom was emotionally not stable, um, and kind of without boundaries. Um, I had to also at a young age, like kind of tell her, like, I don't really want you touching me that much because she was kind of intrusive, possibly a two or at least two fixed as well, but very intrusive type of, I think maybe first grade, kindergarten, first grade, I had to tell her, like, I'm old enough to brush my own hair and put my own clothes on. I think she very much was a live through your children mother. And I really pushed back against that. And I kind of stayed outside and um, not even necessarily being that into being outside, it just got me away. And as I got closer to my teen years, we had a room. They called it the music room. And my family was all very musical. Um, my brother was probably has some level of musical genius, and my mom has a voice that's heaven sent. And my dad kind of produced, and they played music and did performances. And I just always did my own thing because that was not my thing. Um,
Yeah.
and I,
Just
and I
practically
never
speaking, you didn't learn an instrument. You didn't care to participate in
Well,
the.
my
Yeah.
they did actually make me take piano lessons for quite a few years, but I hated it. It's not not
Hmm.
not my thing, and I finally,
Hmm.
at a certain age, was just like, "No, I'm not gonna do this. I don't
Hmm.
like it. It's not me."
Is it
Yeah.
just you and your brother, siblings?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I don't know, they're all very boisterous people. He was like in band and choir and jazz band and theater, and like all the things, and I was just not into any of those things. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I kind of ended up just anyway, this room in the house, like after my brother had moved out because he's older, just kind of as teenage me became my space. I just would go in there and dance. I do dance. Dance is more, I guess, my
Oh,
artistic
okay.
outlet.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would just go in there and play music and dance and do my thing. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, and then I left home at 17, um, and never went back just until recently. My parents are now elderly, and my mom has dementia and
Wait,
is in a
wait. Never went.
facility. So this is
Sorry,
I never went back home. Like,
to visit.
no, I visited.
Oh,
You
okay.
know,
Got it.
I
Okay.
didn't just
Okay.
like ex-nay them off the earth. No,
Okay. Okay.
but I
Yeah.
just never. I guess I did. I just did my own thing, and they. I guess maybe in my 30s, I did have a conversation with my parents because they still thought like I'm not really grounded. They don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going, and
Mm-hmm.
I had some bad relationships, and I just had to tell them, like, I'm actually not unhappy. I'm okay being alone, doing my thing. Like, I don't need the house and the picket fence and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even mind being poor, as long as I can basically survive.
Right.
It's just not what I value. And they were like, "Oh, okay." Don't really get it. They still kind of are shaking their heads, but they were like, "Okay, well, we won't worry about you then."
Uh huh.
Yeah.
So this doing your own thing
Yes.
is a pretty big theme, I would say, throughout your entire life, and starting with the language fascination as a kid. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what is your thing, or what are your things? Where has your attention found
Well,
itself interested? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
mean, it really is about understanding like cultures and um, I've also been into astrology and
Mm-hmm.
MBTI and all the things that are kind of about personalities and why
Mm-hmm.
and how we work. Um, and to me, the language part is there's patterns in languages. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and even how like English used to have more similar patterns to other languages, but that's kind of been like pared down over time to where English is kind of more like simple and shortened and other languages have not done that so much. Um, and I think there's reasons for that as far as our cultures and whether you're more expressive or putting more into life or kind of the American, we need to get this done. Let's make it quick. Let's shorten it type feeling. And so I'm just really interested in all of these aspects of living and and it's all that. Like I think even in my relationship and maybe that's kind of that 5-2 thing of like digging in of that I also want that in my relationship of understanding like what are you feeling? What are you thinking? Why are you doing that? Why didn't
Mm-hmm.
you make this other choice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it vexes him, especially he he's a
Uh-huh.
he's a 953, so
Uh-huh.
he's actually very reserved in what he's going to share on any
Mm-hmm.
level, and yeah, I vex him.
Let's go there in that direction. So yeah, because I guess in my own words, what you're saying is you are your fascination with languages and anthropology um, has a kind of macroscopic scale to it, but that same sensibility exists in your relationship, which is like, what's the sort of emotional logic, for lack of a better word, behind this person's actions? It's sort of like,
Well,
what's
I
happening on
just,
the
I guess,
switchboard?
like, I kind of
Yeah.
want to like bring it in and dig more into like all this stuff is going on this macro level, but how is it working in the individual as well? And I
Hmm.
guess I want
Hmm.
to be able to tie that together. I haven't found all the pieces to tie that together, so I keep trying to
Hmm. So like
pull it
when
all
you're
together.
here's an interesting one. Like when you're questioning your husband about that, is it is there how do I say this? I'm going to paint this question like a polarity, but it might not be this black and white.
Oh,
But is the
okay.
question coming more from that place of curiosity, trying to find these universal answers to how humans are, with him as a sort of specimen, or is it something more in the dimension of like really trying to understand him and your relationship dynamic and holding him as a
Um,
like as a personhood? You
it's
know what I'm saying?
it's probably both,
Yeah.
and I've actually gotten feedback that that's part of the difficulty is
Hmm.
that I do think there is an aspect where it's like I'm always socially experimenting
Yeah. Right.
in all of my relationships and in how I talk about them and frame them, that they're kind of a specimen. And I think, I don't know, he and I have had some recent conversations because we have been talking about the Enneagram and typing and
Hmm.
how we work together,
Hmm.
where he has actually started going, okay, well, he's been able, that's helped him to open up about like, this is what bothers me,
Right.
which has really been helpful. Um, and that's part of it is I, that's the most difficult aspect of our relationship is as a nine, especially, he really needs to feel that I'm all in and that I'm seeing him.
Hmm.
And I
Right.
don't think he always gets that from me.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yeah,
So, I am fascinated by how much your attention goes to your relationship and how you talk about your relationship a lot. And it
yes,
is obviously it's a major part of your life and your world.
yes,
And let's see, it's still part of this interesting kind of polarity or tension that you have in your typing structure, right? There's so much
yes,
energy that goes towards social and relationships, but also there's this like um, very important to you private
yeah,
self that you maintain as a separateness,
right.
even in the context of that relational orientation. And that is part of the tension that you're describing in your relationship. So I wonder if you have
Yeah.
more texture around that, or what
Um,
else comes up there?
what else comes up here? Um, I think it's for me, I have something else we talked about, just very few people in my life that I actually feel close enough to really work on trying to maintain a relationship. Um, my children, my partner, and on some level, my parents and brother. Um, my brother's very contentious relationship. I don't. I'm not really invested in keeping it outside of the care of my parents, really. Um,
Hmm.
but those are like the main relationships in my life, and they are my life. I don't go out to dinners or with friends really, or go play soccer or whatever to the gym people do. Um, that is just the center. Um, and I think maybe some of all the exploration is trying to figure out how to connect myself on a more real level with them that I haven't quite figured out.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I think there's also a part of me that like I have an idea, an idea in my head of like how I want from everyday life to the big picture to look. Like I can see, like I want my relationship to have these aspects. And then when they're not happening, it gets really frustrating for me, and that kind of makes me just go back to doing just me in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of cases. Like I'm not going to be moving towards, and like kind of difficult to compromise myself into, what other people need it to look like and be like and see.
One thing that's coming up for me is like how. So how did you meet your partner, your now partner, and
Um,
what is it like in your
we ac-
yeah
we actually
courtship?
had we had mutual friends online. We originally met online, um, but we had mutual friends that in person knew each other, that went to high school together, and then went to high school with us. And I don't. They invited me into a political debate group, and I actually ended up becoming an admin in the political debate group, and he was an admin as well. And we were just friends for years, uh, several years, just around politics. And politics is actually his interest in history. That's kind of his thing. Um, and I ended up at that time period being involved again because um, I have a Muslim background. Um, and so during that time period post 9/11, I was kind of somebody that could speak to the other side when most people don't have a lot of experience with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how I ended up in that group and meeting him. And he actually kind of tried to defend me a lot because some of the people in the group, it was like a mosh pit. It was not like a let's all be nice talking thing. And so, he was an admin and would be like, okay, I'm going to ban you. You can't talk to this woman this way. And I was like, I don't actually need you to defend me.
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so we ended up talking on that level. At the time, he was married,
Wait, just real quick. So that defending thing, did that? So I'm interested in
and why I don't.
was it? Well, no, it's I hear you that you don't need it.
Yeah.
Um, did it touch you in at all, or was it more like amusing, or how did
Um,
you place it?
I just, it was kind of unnecessary. Was really the only thing
Just
I thought about it. I mean, I understood why
huh.
he was doing it because some of the people were being, you know, these days it would not be able to be a comment on Facebook. It would just immediately knock it out. Um, but
It's
back
funny. Just
then, you could still say it.
that framing itself is interesting. I mean, I I'm thinking of myself as a heart type plus triple attachment. Like if someone rushes to my defense in some kind of way, I have a certain way of it means something to me. It's it's like, oh, that was really sweet. Thank you.
Well,
But the
well, I mean, it is, but I don't really need people to do. I didn't need him to do that.
exactly,
Like
yes,
I
this
I was handling it perfectly
uh-huh.
fine on my own because, and this also comes up in my work. My current work is I'm not going to get really like upset and ruffled. So, if people are cussing at me or upset or whatever, I can just de-escalate it. And but on his end, that is actually what drew his attention was he was like, "You were just coming back with facts and never getting upset that they were calling you names or being
Mhm,
rude."
mhm,
And he was like, "You were just like, oh, well, actually, the Quran says," and putting it out
mhm,
there.
mhm,
And I was like, well, I don't really get engaged in the whole like debate thing. It's like, here's the facts, and
hmm,
past that, I'm out. I don't need to sit there and go back and forth with you and get personal or so. That's
mhm,
kind of, and at some point he got divorced and I wasn't in a relationship. So we both don't actually know how we got there, but just from like being friends talking over all these years, I think maybe, I don't know. We ended up on the phone one night and he was like, "Oh, I think you need a vacation. Do you want to come?" He was living in Florida So he was like, "Do you just want to come have a vacation?" And he's like, if it's not a thing, it's not a thing. If, you take one look at me and go, he's a serial killer, we can get you a hotel, whatever. And so, yeah, I went to Florida for a week's vacation. And
Uh-huh.
and here we are.
How many years later now?
10?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you describe what it's like, the dynamic of being a rejection type and in a relationship with an attachment type, and how that plays out?
Um, it's complicated. Um, I and especially with his typing, it's complicated because he doesn't really. I don't. I don't know. I end up kind of, I guess, being more the masculine energy, and he ends up being more the feminine energy in our relationship because I'm so positioned in what I think this should look like. Like, I want things to be a certain way, and this is the other thing we talked about is like we kind of have separate areas of the house. We each have an
That's right.
end, and we kind of meet in the middle.
Hmm.
And that kind of works for us, especially since we're both withdrawn types. Like I can kind of go recharge, and he can kind of just go chill out.
And just to
And
get some specifics here, so like your side of the house, I remember you mentioning, is very neat, right, and
yes, I
organized
mean,
and clean,
yes, it is.
and his
Not
is a
all
little
of my
messier.
areas are,
Yeah.
but certain. Yeah, he is a total mess.
Okay.
Like stuff everywhere, and a lot of it's just because he has so much stuff. Um,
Hmm.
he's very strong. I If you could type somebody SP, I would. He's
Hmm.
very, very oriented to that and grounded. And, it's a plus to us. We complement each other, I think, in that way. He was telling me last night, like, he reloaded my drinks into the refrigerator. And he was like, "Do you never think to do this?" And I was like, "Well, it's just, no, not really.
Hmm.
I know it's there, but if I have to drink it warm, I have to drink it warm. It's not as much of a thing to me. So,
Yeah.
but he does do, he does most of the cooking and reloads my drinks and
That's a good example of something that we talked about, which is that, as I remember, he needs some level of appreciation for these kinds of acts of service. Like
yes.
it's one of his ways of showing love, and in a certain way, it doesn't. It's one of those. It's unnecessary for you,
Yeah, yes.
right?
It's very
And
This was actually the first part of our relationship was really I actually didn't know what to do with it because, he would bring breakfast in bed and run bubble baths and I was like, I can bathe myself. I don't really need all this.
hmm, hmm,
I need more, I guess, of the connection of you being able to talk to me and share your inner demons or whatever. That's
hmm,
hard. And that's difficult for him to
hmm,
actually be comfortable enough and trust to start sharing, this
hmm.
is what I'm really thinking and feeling. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
but I actually have learned to appreciate, he actually doesn't really do the breakfast in bed and all of that anymore. He still does run me baths occasionally and he does the cooking and most of the time. And, we've kind of, I guess, balanced out where, and I really do appreciate, especially like right now I'm working and he's kind of being a house husband. That's kind of a recent development, but he's actually kind of liking it. He's getting more comfortable with that being okay, I
Hmm,
think, because,
hmm.
there is a lot of, again, cultural stuff around being the breadwinner. And, I think it's been difficult for him to kind of know it's okay. And it's probably difficult. I'm actually not an easy person. Um, I'm a kind person and caring person, not easy to live with. Um, I'm like, well, why did you spend this on that? I'm working this many hours, and and there's like I guess a lot of competency just going into we need things to be working in this certain way and making this happen. And in Nine Land, 3 weeks later, he may be like, "Oh, I did the thing," and I'm like, "Oh, congratulations, we did the thing." So yeah, it's very hard for me to be like, "Okay, you did the one thing on the list out of 10." That's difficult for me. It really is.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think to him though, he's feeling like he's doing all these things. And
Mhm.
sometimes he is, but sometimes it's like he does part of that over there and then he goes over there and cleans part of that. And it's nothing that's more solid.
Mhm.
I want to see like something carried all the way through, I guess.
Mhm.
And that's
And
not always how it's happening.
then what happens for you at an emotional level when
Well, I just go back to I might as well do it myself is what
Mhm.
really happens with me. Most of my feelings are either like being frustrated,
Mhm.
that this is not happening kind of the way I wanted it to, like I saw in my mind it playing out. Or, sometimes it's worse when I'm disappointed because I guess that is a more personal emotion in a way of, I really thought that this was going to happen and it just didn't.
Yeah. One thing I'm tracking through our conversation is there's like we've used the word uncooperative and stuff like that, but it's all there's a kind of independence that you have running through your life or that underpins your sense of self that is in a certain way untouchable and in a certain way that's the word I'm looking for. It's kind of like yeah, give me a second. I think what I'm struck by is the general emotional neutrality of your life. And even to the degree like the Facebook thing, people coming at you with names and they're just being like it doesn't land on it, doesn't ruffle. Does it's like
Yeah,
that's
it's
just
actually,
you know.
and I guess this is why I got so interested in the Enneagram too, is because at, I never realized that it was a thing younger. I just was who I was. But being a little bit older and starting to kind of look at life and trying to actually, this is like the first relationship I've really, I guess, been invested in trying to make it work, like
Mhm.
really like make it better and stronger.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started having to look at myself more and like my role in things.
Mhm.
And it actually has become kind of strange to me because I know exactly who I am. I know what I want, what I'm doing most of the time, where I'm going. Um, but I'm so uncomfortable with like trying to really connect on a different level or get out of my space and my thing. Like I don't
Mhm.
I'm kind of clueless how to like kind of try to bridge that.
Yeah. Like this word that you've been using unnecessary, it keeps
Yes.
that's like my
Yeah.
whole organism is wrapped around that word for some reason because it it's like it's like the whole like asking you for example is that touching it's like that's not even on the playing field
Right.
because
And
because like this unnecessary, this like the inner place that unnecessary has to come from is a certain so far removed from the like
Yes. And I
relational
think
connected.
I
Yeah, you
think
know what I'm
this
saying?
is why my brother and I have such a contentious relationship. I think he's
Hmm.
probably a social dom 6, maybe a 614 actually,
Yeah.
um but he's very he's very big energy and very, but he's also very negative. And to me, I think it doesn't matter whether it's way positive or way negative. Both of those aspects bother me.
Hmm.
But he's always I was being a proud mom. My son got first chair in trombone. So I
Hmm.
was just telling my brother this because he's a musician. I thought it would be a common topic.
Hmm.
And I was like, but of course, it's just kind of like wah, 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 because he had just started. And my brother was just like, oh, well, that's all trombones ever do. It was such an unnecessary thing to me. I'm like, why be unnecessarily that negative about something that's not a negative thing?
Hmm.
And I think I even feel that way about like some positive things, like people that are like unnecessarily. Yeah, I have
Hmm.
um actually she's a superior in my office, but oh my gosh, she must be triple positive. Yeah, she just comes in going like, oh my god, on Monday morning being like, oh my god, we're like one step closer to Friday. And I'm like, dude,
Yeah. Uh,
that is also unnecessary. I haven't had my coffee yet. I just why?
hmm.
So yeah, I it's not, yeah, it is a very, like, can't we just work within this area instead of having to go into all of these other things that
Hmm. Yeah. This is giving me more texture around the word unnecessary because it's almost like you're holding some kind of fantasy that the world could just take its emotional intensity and reduce it to a certain absolute value so that we
yes.
could just be within this band and things would make a little more sense. There wouldn't be as much erraticness. There wouldn't be as much.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
what else? What? Yeah, that
Well,
fantasy.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it kind of is that. Like, what good is it doing? Um,
Uh
like
huh.
we actually had a client in the office last week. We actually had to call the police, but she. I mean, obviously, you're upset when you're struggling, but she actually like reached through the lobby. They had plexiglass, whatever slots, but she actually reached through and like threw a person's computer on the floor and all the stuff off her desk, just screaming. And this is not going to help her get what she needs, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
relate to this in a certain way of being a competence type myself. Like
Right.
that's not effective. It's not an
Yeah.
effective. Like
It's
I get that you
not
feel that way, but it's
effective.
yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's not like I never get angry or never get joyous. I do. But, just not in ways that are unnecessary.
Joy within
Yes.
certain confines, only necessary joy.
Well, yes, I'm not gonna be joyous on a Monday morning that we're a step closer to Friday. That's no.
Listen, I hear you about that. That sounds. I mean, I don't know.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Oh, she's something else.
yeah.
Um, but it's also like even smaller things because, and I know, he's a 9 wing 8, so he actually can really push some anger, you know.
He being
Um,
sorry,
my partner, yeah.
your partner. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, and he's actually a pretty, um anger will come out of him, a lot more than I think with some nines that I've known. My daughter's also a 9 wing 8, my middle daughter.
Mhm.
And, but she's got a 7 fix. So she's a little more kind of fantasy fun, still really withdrawn. Um, but he's 5 fixed and he's kind of just I don't know. He walked out of the house yesterday because I vexed him. This is why I was saying that. He actually told me he asked why in previous relationships I hadn't been murdered because I'm very vexing.
Okay. That's okay.
And then he
Is
went
that
and
an
then he went for a
yeah.
walk. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And well, not to I mean, I have a sense that I know the answer to this question, but did that statement or a question from him land in you in any particular way, or was it also unnecessary or yeah.
I was like, well, you would have to ask them that. I don't know
Yeah, right. Well, yeah,
why they
because obviously you're not yeah, I get it. You're not the person whose perspective it would be coming from, so that's not a question that's
right.
relevant to me.
Yes. I mean, if you're asking if I know that I'm difficult,
Uh-huh.
then yes, I do get that at
Mhm.
this point in my life.
Mhm.
I and I know it's not meant to be selfish, but I know it can really be that because I'm not
Yeah,
going to give you. Um, and I know he posted a Facebook in the Facebook group while he was the short time he was in the Enneagram or Universe group, a video talking about how, like, if I'm on my phone doing something and he comes up and wants to talk, I'm like, well, I'm reading. We can't do this now. And he's like, but if I'm talking to him, he's expected to put his phone down and
that's
he's
right. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's kind of like a roller coaster that you can't get off of because once I start talking, I'm doing my mental pinging thing and I'm going to keep going until all the ideas are out.
Mhm.
And
Right.
he's like, and as a nine, he's kind of, I know other people in the group were like, why doesn't he have a choice? Because he was going, I don't have any choice but to just sit there and let her finish.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's kind
Wow.
of that.
Even even the well, your inner response to his question, why didn't anybody else murder you, is the is an example of that dynamic in the sense that you're not actually buying into the frame of his question. You know,
Right.
it's like you're um so in order for him to have a conversation with you, he has to go some emotional distance or intellectual distance to meet you inside your frame because you're not going to
Right.
do that in the reverse for him, right?
Right. And for
Yeah.
me, I guess I also kind of find like the passive aggressive thing and
Mhm.
to me it feels like, you're trying to guilt me into a response that I'm not going to
Mhm.
have.
Right.
And so that comes up between us quite a bit where he's not really necessarily realizing he's doing it, but like when he walked out yesterday, I was
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
that's like, oh, you're trying to make me feel like, oh, I need to come after you. I need to, and I'm not going to chase you around the yard. We're
Mhm.
we're grown ups. We can sit down and talk.
Yes. Yeah. Well, one thing that you said that was pretty interesting and radical to me is that this is the first relationship in your life that you felt like you really are efforting to make it work. And it's a
Yes.
consistent kind of commitment over a long term. And
Right.
because you want it to work, um, you, I'm assuming what that means is that you've had to make certain kinds of sacrifices that you would not have entertained in the context of other relationships, or you've had to entertain certain questions about the way you're being and
Yeah.
maybe
It's
become more
mainly
flexible in certain kinds of ways, or how have you
yeah, it's
experienced that?
mainly yeah, it's more um like I don't think I really had any difficulty in my previous relationships as far as like me getting along with them. Like I can kind of take people as they are. I
Hmm.
guess
Yeah.
is within certain, obvious boundaries. But I just wasn't I didn't probably wasn't in the relationships for the right reasons in the first place. So it was just like, well, if you can't get along with me, then I'm just out. Like there's no reason to be. And yeah, I finally just reached a point of realizing like, oh, it's either I'm going to be alone or I'm actually going to have to look at myself and try to figure out how to do this differently than what I've always done it. Um, and actually, my kids were really surprised that I got in this relationship. They said they pictured me, meeting somebody in the retirement home at 76 and then marrying. Yeah, they,
Right.
right. They
I can
didn't,
see why. Yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
they're like, wow, this is, and luckily they all like him and they're all into trying to help me figure it out.
Right. So, what have you learned? Or actually, that's not quite the right question. The what I'm getting at is, what are ways that you've found that you have flexed towards him in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise?
Um, well, I don't know that I've made great strides in that, but I have learned to verbalize more, like the words of affirmation that he needs.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That's been a big one of actually trying to remember to go, oh, wow, this looks great. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my 9 wing 8 daughter's been kind of helping me. She did this when she was younger. She won something at school that I had no idea what it was about or what it meant. And she came home and she's like, "Oh, I got this." And I was like, "Oh, great." And she actually stopped me and went, "No, mom, this is really a big deal. I need you to get excited." And I was
Oh,
like,
that's a really
"Oh,
cool.
yeah, I didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
realize." And so I was like, "Oh, well, oh, I didn't know that it was such a big thing. So, yeah, do we need to celebrate? Do something? Yeah, I can do it if I get it. That if I can catch it, that
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not being excited enough or not being there enough for the other person. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I do. It's probably helpful to have somebody that will actually stop me and go, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
um, I know it's not a big thing to you, but it is to me. I actually need you to kind of step up here."
Mm-hmm.
And he's getting a little better at that part too. And actually, that's kind of a recent thing too. Of he saw that one of the videos where it was like you need to tell somebody what bothers you. It was that marriage, the divorce attorney saying that's what happens in marriages, that people don't actually communicate like what's the problem, and so resentment builds up. So
Right.
he's been working on that
Mm-hmm.
since then, and actually going, well, it really bothers me. And the biggest thing that bothers him is that he always feels like I'm 1 foot out the door.
Right. Yeah. I remember that. I remember you saying that phrase last time, and it's striking
Yes.
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
And I don't
Mhm.
really see myself as being 1 step out the door, but I think a lot of it is the boundaries where, um, for me, I'm like, this is not behavior that I'm good with. So I'm not going to be okay with it.
Mhm.
Kind of like the walking out of the house. I'm like, I am going to always pull it back to why can't we just sit down and talk? Like, I don't
Yeah.
get this emotional outburst um, and on the good side of this, though, because his previous marriage, I guess, was pretty volatile, where she was reactive. So, if he got frustrated and threw the remote, she'd be reacting back to that. Where I can just go, I don't think that's helpful to fixing the TV problem. Why don't we just,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
he actually
Yeah.
appreciates that aspect that,
Sure. Yeah.
instead of me blowing it up into something even bigger and bigger and bigger, I just am
Mhm.
like, okay, let's take it down. And
Right.
so it kind of, it's not always a bad, good thing. It's kind of usually our strengths are also our weaknesses. Um,
Of course. Yeah.
yeah. And
Mhm.
so there are good parts to just kind of being able to neutralize.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One
And
thing or one thing that was coming to me is in the example with your daughter where she was like, "Actually, no, mom, this is a big deal for me." It's in a way, what she's doing, or the way that the way that I'm making sense of how it lands for you, is that she's helping you understand why her reaction isn't unnecessary,
Right.
because
Right.
inside her frame, this has a certain meaning to her, and she's inviting you into that frame. And the 5 rejection stance is sort of to be castle walled inside your own frame without entering others' frames. And so that it's kind of an act of generosity to another person to enter their frame, you know. Um,
Right.
and in a sense, that's sort of the attachment reflex, is like, oh, this is important to you. Let me go there. Let me meet you
Yes.
over there. Right. And so
Right.
that rejection thing that happens in both, well, all of your relationships, I imagine, but I'm sensing that theme really in both of the, with your partner and with your daughter,
Right.
as you're
Yeah,
describing it.
they're yeah, well, they're probably the closest to people to
Mm-hmm.
me,
Mm-hmm.
not just because of their personality structures, but my
Mm-hmm.
son is my other 2 children are just very much in their own lives as well.
Yeah.
My
How many kids do you
son's
have?
a
You have 3 total?
3,
Yeah,
yes.
3. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and my older daughter she's probably a hippie burnout type, I would assume, but she
Mm-hmm.
kind of lives semi off grid, way out,
Mm-hmm.
and we do visit, and occasionally, but she has children and is kind of doing her life over there. Um, and then my son is also, um, he has his own Domino's store, so he's also working like 70-hour weeks, and so I only see him in passing as well. Um, yeah, they're just kind of, and she's not that she's not busy. She's a dog groomer, um, but
Mm-hmm.
she also will go like 6 weeks. We don't really talk to each other, but then when she calls, it's like we talk for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think some of that is like she really gets into her 7 fix sometimes too, and it's just she talks so fast and so like blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And is
that
that,
we
I'm curious about your relationship with being a mom and the demands that these other
um,
life forms
oh
have on you.
yes, that
And
is the other thing that came up is that she
yeah.
actually recently in our conversation told me like, well, you weren't really a nurturing mother, and I was
Mm-hmm.
aware of that. I was like, but she has been typed by EU, so she's kind of familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I understand, why, and there were good parts. But she also, I guess, said that as a child, like she felt kind of went overachiever for a while. Um, she actually went to school for biology and was really pushing perfection on a like, oh, I got 100% instead of 102 level,
Mm-hmm.
being upset. And I was like, why are you pushing so hard? But she was explaining the other night that like she didn't want to put anything else on my plate. Like,
Oh,
like she was looking at me as a single mom and going to school and like trying to do, and she was like, I didn't want to put anything else on you.
right.
So that actually hit me. That was difficult for me. Um,
Yeah.
that I don't know. Again, there's good and bad. I think the good part is my children are very independent. They probably had no choice but to, figure out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because if they got a boo boo, I didn't just run over there and be like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" I was like, "Is it bad?" And they kind of joked that you had to be bleeding or a bone sticking out or whatever to get a reaction on that level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they also had a voice. I think it never bothered me for them to speak, to give their view of things. Um, Even if it kind of bordered on disrespectful. Because, my generation, you didn't speak, you were very deferring to elders. And so I think, like, the positive side is they've always been able to speak to me, um, and tell me, this is what's going on. When they did get in trouble as teenagers, they weren't afraid to call me. They knew I wasn't going to react and blow up and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, be reactive like that. So, they would always be like, oh gosh, I drank and I'm stuck and I need you to save me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would
Mm-hmm.
come get them and it wouldn't be like a big ordeal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know with my parents always told me that we could talk to them, but they didn't really mean that. They would blow up. It would be,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, are you willing to share a little more texture about what was hard hearing that from your daughter, that about
Um,
not being
sh-
nurturing? Yeah.
um, I really, that also gets to a very difficult area for me. I don't,
Sure. Yeah.
um, obviously I really love my children,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I don't know how to be that. Um, and I would like to be that. I would like to be more that, but like
Mm-hmm.
getting there, I don't know how. And, I'm okay. Like my hippie burnout maybe daughter, she'll just like run up and hug me. So
Uh-huh.
I don't think since she was the one engaging that, I don't know that she got that as much as my other daughter who probably needed me to step towards her more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, it's difficult I do feel like I left a hole in their life of something that they should have had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, maybe, it's something we can work on in our going forward life where,
Yeah.
I can be a little bit more hands on, affectionate. And I have been trying to do that. At least we don't live close. Both my daughters live in a different state. It's close,
Mm-hmm.
like 4 or 5 hour drive, but, um, even just talking to them in text, trying to put a little more heart emojis into it, a little
Uh-huh.
more,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I love you and, I hope you're doing well type things
Right.
that I wouldn't normally do. Cause,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like my daughter wrecked her car and she was texting, but she was like, totaled my car. And my first response was it your fault?
Uh-huh.
Before I stopped and went, oh, you're actually supposed to say, are you okay?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like, and so I don't know. The best part is I've started to catch myself more. Like I think the more I
Mm-hmm.
get aware, the more kind of go, "Oh, wait, I shouldn't have gone there. That's not
Mm-hmm.
the right thing. I should actually be asking if your head's still on." Yeah. Her airbag did blow. I did ask her after that. I was like, "Oh, and yeah."
Yeah. Yeah. It's as I'm hearing you talk, I can feel the a certain sense of the emotional texture of this has a more heightened flavor than some of the other topics we've explored.
Right.
And so I can feel kind of your sincerity in wanting this. And I also can see your competence orientation to it, like the kinds of phrases that you put in a text message and the sequence of questions that you ask after a catastrophe and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it really does not come naturally to just I don't not be me.
right.
Like I don't know how to step out of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I guess there's probably frustration in me at this point in my life too because I'm in my 50s. So I've had quite a bit of life experience and seen where things have not and been able to compare, I guess, with more people and learn more. Um,
Hmm.
and it's it's still just kind of interesting to me in kind of that social experiment thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for the first time in my life, I'm actually kind of like wanting to try to develop that other piece to try to kind of integrate something a little bit more to where I do have better relations with the people in my life and,
Mm-hmm.
don't make them feel like they can't be nurtured by me or, that I don't have that or can't do it or not
Right.
have whatever else they might need. Like,
Mm-hmm. It it occurs to me to ask something like, what's your what's your relationship with having been nurtured, or the sense of wanting that or that mattering to you in some way, like when you were really young?
um, yeah. Well, I think part of me, I didn't find my mom competent enough to nurture me, I think, in the way
Mm-hmm.
that I needed
Mm-hmm.
nurtured. She was affectionate, like hug you, love you, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
actually want that. She was actually too handsy for me. It felt
That's
very
right. Yeah.
intrusive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, she couldn't emotionally be there, like if I had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
She was very also, I guess, wrapped up. And, when you get older, you understand the reasons why. But, she was going through menopause and thought my dad was cheating. And she had all this her own stuff that was all
Mm-hmm.
her focus. And she wasn't very like easy to deal with, to talk to. She was also very volatile and probably part of that unnecessary thing too that in a different time back then, a lot of it would probably be child abuse today, but she would just like chase my brother around with the fireplace poker and, you know, just blow up
Mm-hmm.
completely.
Mm-hmm.
She drugged me out of a pool one day by my hair and was just, ah, yeah. I think she was probably 2, 6, maybe 8. At, and I know everybody thinks their mom's that, but I think she really could have been one.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and it's just very emotionally manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really felt nurtured by her, and I don't think it kind of still goes back to the I was better off just taking care of things myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is kind of true with my dad, that he was just very busy, um, working, absent.
Mm-hmm.
He was fun when he was at home. Um, I'm, there was probably a closeness between us back then more than with my mom because, he was not emotionally reactive. I think he probably did a lot of the same. I'm not going to react to your
Mm-hmm.
mom's craziness. Just going to go over here and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
teach you how to drive the car or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, Most of the stuff I just learned on my own. I learned how to ride a bicycle on my own. I learned how to swim on my own after I almost drowned and was like, I need to teach myself how to do this so that doesn't happen again.
Right. Right.
Um, so I don't know. It's not that I didn't, I think everybody wants to be nurtured. Um, but it just wasn't happening in my family the way I needed it to be happening for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't tell how much I'm, let's see, projecting a sense of the grief that I would have had in that kind of situation versus where your emotional relationship with what you just said. And I guess I'm
Yeah.
wondering, yeah, go ahead.
Um, I have never really felt like, oh, I had a bad childhood or
Right.
it was like way emotional. That's true. Um, my brother actually really feels like we were horribly abused and it was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, kind of that same feeling.
Yeah.
What makes me emotional is me not being okay. Like even today, mostly my family does not see me as a competent, you know, making it in life type person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of realized, I guess part of that probably is the SOSX that I just kind of do
Sure.
whatever and don't. But it actually bothers, that is what bothers me with my family
Not being seen
is,
as competent, like that.
yeah,
Your shit
yeah.
together.
And,
Yeah.
my dad has been in like nursing care and my mom is actually in a memory care facility at this point. And my brother doesn't work. So he's kind of been navigating all the parental stuff. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to take care of this. We have a really kind of large estate out here, like, 5 acres. And the
Mm-hmm.
lawnmower was broken, and we're trying to figure out how to get that fixed. And, my dad's just like, well, if you can't get the lawnmower fixed, pay somebody to do it. Okay. So I pay somebody to do it. And then my brother's like, well, you should have never let it get up. And there's an estate fund. And so my brother's like not going to reimburse me for paying to get the property mowed. And he's like, you should have just never let it get out of control. And I'm like, well, it would have been cheaper to fix the lawnmower or, but then I have aunts that are driving by threatening to bring their lawnmower from their house to mow it also. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody is so oriented to all of this. The lawn needs to look nice and we need to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that this is all going, and it's kind of your fault. You let it get out of control. And so, the trust is not going to actually reimburse you for those costs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I always feel emotional in relation to my family is, I was taking care of these things. I was just trying to do them in a different way than what like you thought that how they should happen. And
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really that worried about, if it takes an extra 2 weeks to fix the mower, then that's what it takes. And it also kind of, I guess, there's circumstances there where it puts me kind of out of control of, I have to actually move my vision and my path to stop. Okay, now I've got to pay for this fine lawn people to come mow and like whatever. When I had a plan. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't feel seen in that, like that they're seeing me as being competent and being who I am, and that I just because I'm not doing it their way doesn't make it. It kind of goes back to that 30-year-old talk of, I am just not, I don't value the same things I think that they
Right.
value. And
Yeah.
I
That's
kind of,
yeah. Good.
it's kind of like the introvert extrovert thing, where you see the meme about like, well, why don't extroverts just take it down instead of the other way around? And again, going back to our cultural thing and me trying to understand, like, why does this all work this way? Like, why does it have to be that way?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they also kind of think, with him being a house husband, that I'm just in another not good relationship and it's me doing the same things again. And, I should have a partner that's doing all this stuff. And, you know, I always try to explain that, like, he's actually, what I value is him being here and being able to help take care of the property. He actually did fix the lawnmower. It just took some time. Um, and being that support to me more than like the financial aspects. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's just like a disconnect between me and my family and yeah, probably, yeah, just that, the SOSX versus probably a lot of SP going on there that
Right. Yeah.
it makes it difficult for me because I don't feel understood there, or that they're looking like that there could be another side.
Hmm. Yeah. And just the disconnect at the level of what matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
goes back all through life, from the little Kelly all the way through. I think just the going to school didn't really matter to me. I wanted to be doing a different life, like, just experiencing people and different things, and not have to be in this is what you've got to do and what are supposed to learn. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I I just feel moved to say that I feel touched by what you're saying. I can feel the emotional kind of resonance of this, how kind of frustrating and painful it is for you not to feel seen in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I know. I don't I'm not sure I realized that until recently either, but yeah, I
Hmm.
actually had a like huge cry with my entire family, with my kids and my partner at a barbecue.
Hmm.
That just
Wow.
well, I actually had a drink or two.
Uh
And
huh.
yeah, that just all
Yeah.
came out like
Uh huh. Uh huh.
a whole lifetime of kind of being like the black sheep of the family, I guess, like being the one that's
Right.
kind of off from what that group is. And
Hmm.
so when you ask, like, even like them all singing and doing their thing, as a child, it's not like I felt left out because I didn't actually want to do that. That's not,
Hmm.
I wanted to be doing my own thing. But on the other hand, it's like, I don't think they ever realized to come either into my space,
Hmm.
and that comes
Hmm.
back to like even in my relationship now, always like wanting people to come into my frame.
Right.
But yeah, there's also that other side of it that, little Kelly was just over there doing her thing. And um, I did have one good moment with my father while I was in university, the second time around, um, because I had actually won a regional French speaking competition in high school, and nobody in my family was there. It like just kind of flew over the off the radar,
Hmm.
um, which again, it wasn't like a big whatever. Um, But I realized, because I did an Arabic speaking competition at university, and I got a little award, and I guess I was telling my dad about it, and he said, "Well, why didn't you invite us?"
Oh.
And I was like, "Well, I didn't even think about it. I didn't know you'd be interested." And I so on the other side, I don't think it's that they wouldn't come. It's just also me not sharing that this
Right.
is what I'm doing. Like, I don't even think to be like, "Oh, yeah, I need y'all to come to my thing,"
Right.
you know? And so I actually really realized in that moment too how much me not giving of myself kind of leaves people not knowing who I am.
Hmm.
So that's
Wow. Yeah. That's a pretty
yeah.
profound point. And I think there's just given what you're saying about how you grew up, there's probably a nature and nurture component to that
Right.
dynamic, right?
Right. Yes.
Um,
And
but
so
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and my dad was actually really interested in my Arabic. So I did my speech for him in his living room. But
Oh,
yeah. So
and well, just
so
what was,
that was
yeah,
just like kind of a good moment because he doesn't speak Arabic, and it was probably just sounded like whatever to him. Um,
right. Uh-huh.
but yeah, it was just kind of, I guess, as that was kind of a connection of, you know, I actually my dad has actually talked to us directly since he's gotten older about realizing how absent he was, that he was working too much, and he probably should have paid more attention to the actual relationships. So he's actually really worked at that, and so that was kind of a moment of him really trying to do that and be like, "Oh, I'm not into this stuff, and I have no idea what you're saying, but I would like you to go ahead and show me what it is."
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Um, it's so funny, this dynamic. I feel like my heart is just so warmed by that story, and my senses, it was, you said, you framed it, it was a good moment.
yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
I could,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
It's sweet.
realize that's yeah,
Well,
my
I guess
dad is
what I'm
I actually this is what's funny, like, I actually see my dad is, like, a very sweet person. When
Mhm.
my mom was first going into the hospital, my dad had me drive him all over town trying to find
Mhm.
a specific rose that was the rose he gave her on their first date, like, 60 years
Mhm.
ago,
Mhm.
and we had a horrible time, but he found this rose for her. And so, he's a very but the like, while we're doing this, I was actually like, "She has dementia, she doesn't know, she's not gonna
Mm.
I don't think she's gonna remember," and she didn't really, and so, yeah, it kinda goes back to that unnecessary thing again where
Aha, yeah, yeah.
I was just like, "Why are we driving all to 20 different florists?" And it was, like,
Mhm.
very sweet to him,
Mhm.
and I can see where it's sweet, but it just doesn't hit me that way. I'm just not yeah, my partner says I'm a -3 on the romance scale, of 1 to 10.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just not how I connect. Like, my connection is more really probably verbal,
Mhm.
and w wanting you to share with me, like or to draw me out maybe. I mean, maybe even that as well. Like, I
Right.
actually like people who can draw out more of where I can't get to myself.
Mhm. Yeah. And that, on that note, actually, how are you feeling right now in this conversation?
Um, well, I actually really appreciate you. You're actually very good at asking questions that actually do that, that kind of and some of them I can't answer, some of them would probably take a lot more thought and reflection into,
Mhm.
what that is for me. But
Mhm.
just yeah, I'm okay with this.
Great. It's so funny to I'm tracking this, let's see, where am I at with this? It's like in the last probably half hour of our conversation, we've dropped into some territory that is really saturated with a lot of heart, and at least that's as I'm experiencing it. And we get to the sort of um, the moment where we're going to tie the bow on the story, and then the way that like your phrase at the end of it is like, and that's okay with me, as opposed to, and I feel it's like there's not obviously like this effusive verbal kind of thing, but I can still feel in your statement that there is like a way that you're connected to a kind of heartwarmingness, even though that's not necessarily the way that you would put it.
Yes,
Yes.
maybe.
Maybe, okay. Well, okay, so that's the thing, because there's an interesting, put it, tension between our two type structures happening in this moment, right?
Yes,
As I'm hearing
yes,
you reveal these things and you're experiencing them in real time, sharing them.
yes.
Yeah.
Y yeah, I don't emote that way, the same
Right.
way.
Right.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
it's very different.
Have you experienced over the course of our conversation, like something that I've tracked in our conversation is a certain way that we started in a bit of a kind of, well, how do I say this? When we started our conversation, we were kind of mapping the terrain that we potentially could delve into, and we were kind of in your childhood, we were in your relationship, we talked about your work, we kind of touched into these different areas, but we were sort of, it's this kind of surface level map a little bit, and then we've sunk into a couple of these places that have um, more of your personhood is being revealed in each of these things. That's what I'm tracking. Are you tracking the same thing?
Yes. Yeah, and a couple of those weren't super comfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of I'm sure you could tell as well that I just get stopped, like,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like, I don't know that. I don't know how I felt about that. I don't know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that's also difficult for me because it goes back to kind of the same thing as my work or anything else, where if I don't know what I'm doing or what it should be feeling like, then I just get stuck, like I can't move forward. I think even with emotions, like if there's things that I'm more in tune with, like I'm having fun with my partner or my daughter or whatever. Um, I get much more comfortable and in fun with that. Or even if I'm talking about something that maybe is deeper and more difficult, like um, we didn't really get into my trauma from my first marriage, but
Mm-hmm.
even if I'm talking about that, I can really get into talking about because I that's kind of past and I know how that played out for me. But
Mm-hmm.
like in the moment, being like, how are you feeling about this thing? I can't just impromptu. It's like I have to
Sure.
go into my little mind cabinet and start going like, what is that emotion? What is that? I don't know what that is. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of having to define what that is. It's like I have to define it before I can like, oh, I feel that.
Right. Right. Uh, Um, I'm noticing the time, so we'll probably wrap up in a
Okay.
little bit here.
Yeah.
But that piece you just said is really good as a kind of summary of how your interior structure works and kind of moment to moment interactions. And I'm wondering if during the course of your relationship with your partner, or as you've discovered the Enneagram and have developed more of this kind of awareness of your structure, if there's anything that has helped you get more in touch with your moment to moment experience.
Um, a little bit. Not so much on the actual emotional yet. I think I'm still working on this. We're still
Mm-hmm.
going to keep working. But yeah, being able to stop myself and even see it and go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I am having a feeling here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think in the past I even was tracking like at least in my body, like an actual feeling. It was just like, oh, something happened, and then I had to figure it. And now I can actually go, oh, that's a feeling. Stop in
Yeah.
the moment and try to figure it out instead of it
Right.
being like 4 days later, and I go, I think that upset me because I can actually
Right.
stop right now and go,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, it's a little bit of progress, not, and yeah, the Enneagram has really, I guess, at least put me on that path and being able to see the structures and what I'm doing and a little better so that I can go, oh, wait, there's something there. I should look at it right now because if I don't, then I may not be able to figure out what it is because it may be fleeting or it may be
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So what has this been like for you, this conversation?
This conversation?
Yeah.
Did we
Speaking of
cover
moment to
this
moment,
already? We just didn't we already cover this a few minutes
you're
ago?
right. I was actually aware of repeating the question, but is there anything fresh now? Looking
Anything
at it.
fresh now?
Yeah.
Um, I actually feel a little vulnerable in
Hmm.
having done this, putting it out
Yeah.
there,
Hmm.
um, and kind of where we first started on like, oh, I'm seeing myself on this camera, and I don't know that I want to see myself in that way.
Right. Yeah.
So that's mainly what I'm feeling right now is, yeah, it's the same thing when you first asked because you started there as well. Like when you first were like, do you want to do this? I just said yes because I was like, I can always just be like, no, it's not going to work out if it doesn't.
Hmm.
But I kind of wanted to push that a little bit
Hmm.
because it's not really something I'm comfortable with. And to me, that's part of getting out of your comfort zone and structure is to actually push yourself into, different experiences that are outside of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this, and I thank you for trusting me with this, and I really appreciate you and our conversation and your willingness to kind of go there.
Yeah, well, thank you. I would have
Yeah.
probably never done it if you hadn't actually directly said, "Hey."
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's close and until next time.
Okay. Thank you, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.